All right, Turton Van. A short while back, Mr. White endorsed William Webster, who I'm sure you're well aware of, and Webster's position that Trent contradicted Hippo and Carthage because it rejected the Book of Esdras. Do you hold that same position, Turton Van, or is your position different?
I thought, my position, Webster obviously has studied these matters he has more experience than I do. And I'm sort of loath to say that I have the same opinion as though I've studied as much as he has. But I have seen nothing to make me disagree with his opinion about whether it was Septuagint for Esdras or something else.
Okay. All right. My next question would be, is Melito of Sardis, is his canonical list identical to the Protestant list?
Nope.
It is not. Okay.
No, it's not. It's missing Esther.
Okay. And what about Esdras? Is it possible that Melito could possibly have an apocryphal book in there?
The world of possibility is so amazing. I mean, there could be a textual variant in the transmission of Melito of Sardis.
Okay.
What's likely is no, he didn't have any apocryphal books in his list.
Okay, that's a good enough answer for me. I know we can't get to definitive stance on that, but it's fine enough. Turton Fan, in regards to the ancient codices, I know there are a number of them that I didn't go into. Am I correct to note, as Mr. Machuda notes, that these books have a number of Deuterocanonical books listed within them?
I'm sorry, I think I misunderstood you. I couldn't follow your question.
Do a number of the ancient codices have Deuterocanonical books listed within them?
Some of the ancient codices include books that are canonical and non-canonical, including ones that are not Deuterocanonical either.
Okay, I want to ask my last question before time runs out. You can go ahead and go as long as you need to answer it. But my question is, since you earlier were mentioning possible historical inaccuracies and moral errors that the Deuterocanonical books have, is it possible to take the position that Martin Luther took, who viewed Judith as a Christian allegory? Is that a possibility?
Well, I don't claim to personally know what Luther's position was, but I don't see a reason to take Judith as Luther did on the ground, to take it as Luther did, according to what you've just said, on the grounds that the early church accepted this book, if the early church didn't accept it as an allegory as Luther did. In other words, I don't see a reason to accept this book on grounds that came to be much later, that are in conflict with the other supposed reasons I should accept the book. In other words, sort of phrase it differently, if the Christians had all the time said Judith is just an allegory, and the Jews who accepted this, supposedly, had said all the time this is just an allegory, as many have said with the Song of Solomon, for example, then I wouldn't have a problem accepting that there might be something that looks like a glaring factual error, because I understand that it's supposed to be allegory. But if it's always been accepted as history and presented as sort of an historical work, and not as an allegory, then I would have a problem using that as sort of a after the fact justification to try to keep it in a list.
Okay, perfect. That'll conclude my final cross-examination time. Thank you for your time, Turton.
You're welcome.
Now is the time for the negative conclusion. Turton fan, you have 10 minutes. You may begin when you're ready.
The scriptures should be our rule of faith and practice. And to that end, it's important for us to try to do our best to determine what the scriptures are. It's not just something that we do, it's what people have been doing since the time of Christ. As we noted during this debate, both Jesus and the apostles had a concept of the scriptures, and they didn't feel the need to write out a list for us of which scriptures are the scriptures. But nevertheless, they had a concept of what the scriptures are. And they got that concept from the Jews. When we look through church history, every time Christians went to Jews and asked which are the books, they always got the approximately the same answer back, and it didn't include these Deuterocanonical books. Now, there can be kind of a conspiracy theory that, well, it could have been there, someone could have tried to take it out, could be some kind of anti-Christian conspiracy. Of course, that doesn't seem to make sense, because the particularly Christian books of the Bible, like Isaiah or the Psalms, which so strongly speak of Christ, aren't taken out. But the parts that hardly have, you could hardly read a book like Tobit and think that that's a strongly Christian book. I encourage people, go read it. You'll see what I'm talking about. One of the stories in Tobit has to do with this prophet. He's unclean, so he can't sleep in his house, so he sleeps outside, and a bird, goes on his face, and now he goes blind, and he's got to try to find a way to solve his blindness. It's not an especially Christian book, and it has, even, as I pointed out before, some syncretic paganism mixed in there, where there's an sort of an exorcism by making a devil smell the bad smell of burning fish liver and heart. It's not a specifically, distinctively Christian work, and the Jews there's no sect of the Jews that we're aware of that preserved these, that's continuing to live, that preserved these for us. There's some fragments of some of the works that have been found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, or through some other techniques. We've found some traces that some of these books that are in the Deuterocanonical category may have been written in some kind of Semitic language. We can't say Hebrew because we don't have the originals. We don't have any copies of the originals or copies of the copies, or even any copies of any number of generations back, except for these fragments and so forth that have been found now. But for the bulk of church history, we didn't have them because the Jews didn't preserve them, although they did preserve the books they had been entrusted. I apologize. I don't have the time. If someone could post it in the chat, I'd appreciate it, because I seem to have lost track of the time I have remaining. But let me get right to the heart of this debate. We have seen that what the Jewish testimony is, what we actually get from the Jews, from Josephus, from other sources. It was asked sort of, how can we figure out what Josephus' books are if he doesn't specifically list them in that when he enumerates that there's 22 books. Well, Beckwith has kind of a long analysis of it. If you look at page 80 of the most recent printing of his book, it mentions, he ends up concluding after lengthy analysis, at most then, Josephus' canon differs from the contents of the Hebrew Bible by one book, and in that it possibly omits Ecclesiastes or the Song of Songs. So now, in the course of this short debate, it may be difficult to kind of prove that, but Josephus' testimony to this short 22 or 24 book canon is there. We have the testimony of the fathers who contacted Jews. We have the testimony of Jerome, which, Mr. Albrecht discredits, although Cardinal Cajetan, right before the Reformation, thought everything else should be reduced to the opinion of Jerome. So, Trent had its opinion, but we don't have any special reason to trust the opinion of Trent coming in the 16th century over the historical evidence that we have in other areas. We perhaps will hear in the conclusion some answer to these serious problems with Baruch. Baruch, as I pointed out, has a number of glaring mistakes. One of the errors is the fact that the writer is apparently unaware of the fact the temple has been destroyed and is asking it to be read in a temple that's gone. Another problem is that it refers to a high priest that doesn't seem to have existed. And we could go on. Those are not the only problems with Baruch. And we pointed out in Judith that Nebuchadnezzar is not the king of the land that it's identified as. If that's supposed to be an allegory, I'd be very interested to hear what church father said that it's an allegory. When did this first become justified in terms of allegory? But in what sense is that an allegory? It's kind of like when you mix up what day of the week it is and you say, oh, well, I just meant it was Monday allegorically. Well, it doesn't sound like a very reasonable explanation. And without some evidence that there's really an allegory going on, Well, it just sounds like a kind of after-the-fact excuse. The rest of the text looks like it's supposed to be historical accounting. What about the question of the tripartite division? Well, Mr. Albrecht conceded that he would need additional information to be able to make a determination about whether or not this reference to Psalms as the third category was possibly a reference to the other writings category. And the Psalms would be the largest book in that category. So it would be a natural, if there are indeed three categories, then it would be natural for someone to use the largest book as synecdoche for the entire category of writings. So we do see there are places in the New Testament where books or prophets are referred to by names that aren't the name of the prophet, by the name of the sort of the section in which they're found. And we could get into that in a little more detail if we had more time. Unfortunately, we don't. It's still been a very interesting debate, even with the limited time we have. The sort of closing points I'd like to direct you to are the fact that when it comes to discussing these fathers, we have been sort of told that we can't listen when Athanasius says that the canon includes these and not the other books. We're not supposed to consider that he's used the word canon that way, because canon can be used different ways. But we're, in essence, told that we have to consider all the times when the word scripture or writing is used, as though it can't be used multiple ways. That doesn't seem like a reasonable basis. More importantly, even when we look at the fathers to try to say, okay, did they think that it was that those were parts of the scripture, and using the standard of, well, did they call them scripture? When we apply that standard to the Deuterocanonical works with respect to the apostles and Jesus, they fail. There's none of them found there. There's also some proto-canonical works not found there. Okay, all right. That's interesting. That would be evidence against the canonicity of those proto-canonical books. And if we lost those books, we wouldn't lose much of the Old Testament. It's important to recognize that. It's not as though that's the only test or the only evidence. We have lots of evidence, and the evidence, when we combine the internal evidence that some of these deuterocanonical books have sort of glaring contradictions or doctrinal errors, when we combine the evidence of what the Jews taught, if we combine the fact that the early church did not uniformly accept these as canonical, and if we weigh in the fact that even as late as right up to the Reformation, it wasn't viewed as a settled thing that these are canonical in the sense that Trent has defined them to be. If we view all of those things together and we weigh the biblical testimony which seems to suggest that Jesus was specifically endorsing the canon of Scripture which ends with 2 Chronicles, well, and that would not be the Septuagint canon, well, then what we're left with is the conclusion that at least one, if not more, of these books that are now in the Roman Catholic canon should not be there. Whether it's only one or all of them that shouldn't be there, I'll let you, the listener, decide. But at least we can properly recognize that Baruch should not be there. And with that, I thank you for listening, and I thank Mr. Albrecht for kindly agreeing to debate me on this subject.